Hi everyone, this is Aisha and welcome to a new video of Read a Day Club. Today I will be talking about all my favorite reads of 2024 and also try to mention some of the best films I watched in 2024. I had read somewhere that you don't just read a great book, it reads you back. These are some of the books that have read me back in the year of 2024. So I will be talking about 10 books and I have not ranked them in any order. I really can't. All these I equally love. So let's do the ones that I reread at the start of this year. Coincidentally, all of these I read at the start of the year and then move on to the others. So the first book that I reread in 2024 is Cioran's The Trouble with Being Born. Reading Cioran at least once a year has become a ritual for me. The first time I read him was back in 2021. I read his On the Heights of Despair and I was immediately drawn to his writing like a moth to a flame. This year I reread, actually this is my second time reading The Trouble with Being Born. The book contains aphorisms on just the nature of existence, the nature of despair, the futility of life and just the human condition. As I'm saying these things, I'm just reminded of a few films that I watched this year. That is Inarritu's Beautiful, Kurida's Nobody Knows, and Farooq Saad's The House is Black. Short film, you can easily. I streamed it on YouTube. It's there for free. Yeah, all these movies, this book. I think the movies complement the philosophy or like the anti-philosophy of Cioran in this book, and they're just brutally honest, provocative, confrontational, just works of razor sharp realism, if that makes sense. Now, this is not a book that's written to be enjoyed in a traditional sense, unless, of course, you're like me and you love, you really find depth and meaning in and value and real value in contemplating and just peeling back the layers of our lived reality, trying to look underneath the veil, trying to look underneath the supposed meaning that is so um, plastered on everything that we do and everybody that we see. So, if you like contemplating that kind of fragility, that kind of brutal honesty, you will enjoy this book. It's not a one sitting read either. I mean, obviously, I read it cover to cover. But at the same time, I keep revisiting this book in stages throughout the year. The same thing I've done with Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Again, a book that will always be my favorite, no matter the year. So both books hold the same place in my heart. They force me to think through my feelings and feel through my thoughts. And that's the kind of writing Cioran does. That's the kind of state of mind that he puts you in. The kind of raw and cruel honesty that this book holds is unapologetically confrontational and dark and introspective. The way that he was able to verbalize such complex human emotions, such human complexity, get to the roots of the depths of the human condition, to be so articulate and raw and dissecting of human emotions to such a scale, I don't think it was possible to reach such depths. His lines cut straight to the heart and gut of what it means to feel and to be aware that one feels. It's like validation I didn't know I needed. Speaking of things that validated me this year, two films that I watched that validated me quite unexpectedly, and that is Right Now, Wrong Then and On the Beach at Night Alone. Both these films just completely spoke to me. I resonated with the characters, I resonated with the setting, the imagery, the purpose of the imagery that existed in both these films. And just like my ritual of reading Cioran once every year, two films that I watch at least once every year is Taste of Cherry and Naked. Since we remember clearly only our ordeals, it is ultimately the sick, the persecuted, the victims in every realm who will have lived to the best advantage. The others, the lucky ones, have a life, of course, but not the memory of a life. Without the faculty of forgetting, our past would weigh so heavily on our present that we should not have the strength to confront another moment, still less to live through it. Life would be bearable only to frivolous natures, those, in fact, who do not remember. Where are my sensations? They have melted into me. And what is this me, this self, but the sum of these evaporated sensations? So the next one is the one and only The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I read this at the start of this year, I think Jan or Feb. It was my second time reading this book, and even after two whole readings, I am still speechless. I and not clueless. Don't get me wrong. I have so much to say about this book, but I just don't know where to begin and how to shape my thoughts into words that would do justice to my experience of reading this book. I felt the same after watching Tarkovsky's Stalker for the first time this year, and even Majid Majidi's Children of Heaven and Color of Paradise. All these movies just left me completely and utterly speechless afterwards, and that's the same way I felt after reading The Brothers Karamazov. He peels back the layers of humanity, showing you what underlies a human condition, what makes you hope, despair, laugh, weep, cry, and almost immediately, almost in the same breath, he makes you question and loathe everything all at once. On the surface, this reads like a murder mystery. I mean, that's how your first reading of the story is going to be. Of course, there is a lot in it about religion, justice, individuality, love, self, family, and so much more. But it is, I feel, in during your second reading, you will be able to see the intricate philosophical threads and be able to connect the dots. The story is about three Karamazov brothers: Alyosha, who is the spiritual soul; Ivan, who is the skeptic intellectual; and Dmitri, who is the passionate libertine. And the relationship with each other, and of course, their brilliant father, Fyodor. Now, what makes this novel so memorable is how it confronts themes like free will versus faith, pursuit of pleasure versus a complete restraint from it, belief in the complete absence of meaning versus creating your own meaning, revenge versus forgiveness, eternal life versus oblivion. So many opposites that exist within the realm of human existence and human behavior. And that's exactly it, right? We act out of these definitions, though not in such a lucid and self conscious manner most of the times, but we do belong to often contradictory schools of thought. And this is exactly what the Brothers Karamazov does so well. It has characters who continue to exist, who continue to assert their identity and their individuality because of their flawed contradictions. Now, it's impossible to read a book like this and not feel emotional. Keeping everything else aside, keeping the interpretive lens of Brothers Karamazov aside, I've never really read a book like this that has completely shattered me in all the good ways, of course. There were moments I had to pause and read the same passage or page multiple times because what it stirred in me felt so raw and overwhelming. I read somewhere that in the Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky doesn't really give you answers concerning life, love, self, religion, soul, etc. He hands you to yourself in the most tragic, raw, questioning, and alive manner. I felt for the brothers in a very similar way, the way I felt for the kid in Loveless. It just changed something in me. The next book I want to talk about is Stoner. So, this is the last book that reread this year. I used to have a physical copy of the book, but not anymore. I really want to get the NYRP edition the next time I buy it because this is a book that I'm going to read multiple times. So I know I need to own a copy of it. So when I think of Stoner, it just gives me that feeling of being very close to nature. So, sitting at the waterside, hearing the lapping of the waves, a gentle breeze, just no other sound whatsoever. Just me and nature and just an empty, silent, meditative existence. Now, if you've seen this movie, Eric Romer's The Green Ray, so the ending of this movie, that's exactly what reading Stoner feels like to me. It has that very moving, sentient, and lofty experience, which is also, it's a paradox because this is such a grounded and realistic story. So just read this book. That's it. That's all I'm going to say. In his 43rd year, William Stoner learned what others much younger had learned before him, that the person one loves at first is not the person one loves at last. And that love is not an end, but a process through which one person attempts to know another. Alright, so this is the manga. Not a lot of stories make me cry. And I don't mean cry on the inside, but properly cry on the outside. Large, like giant tears. So when I finished reading this manga, I sobbed. And the manga that I'm talking about is Blood on the Tracks, a film that made me cry this year was Werner Herzog's Grizzly Man. So this was the first time I watched Herzog's films. I started with Fitzcarraldo, another favorite of mine. Other films that almost made me cry were Juggy, that I watched on Mubi very recently, and even Leila's Brothers. I was dead quiet for a very long time after both the movies got over, processing the emotional weight of both stories, the visuals, the dialogues, just what the movie holds is something that is very devastating and something that really forces you to think and forces you to live through those moments that you see in the film. Same thing happened when I read Goodnight Pan Pan, Pun Pun. I'm just going to say both, Pan Pan and Pun Pun. Again, devastating but irresistibly beautiful and sincere. So, Blood on the Tracks is a psychological horror manga psychological horror manga that is about the suffocating relationship between a mother and a son. So the boy is shy and passive. I mean, he's a boy. He's growing up. And the mother, well, she's overprotective, obsessive, neurotic, and narcissistic. Now, this is not explicitly said, but a lot of her behavior in the manga and some of her traits do or can be associated with like a narcissistic personality disorder, obsessive need to control, master and affection for her son, and her overprotectiveness, which extends to not only her controlling or wanting to control her son's actions, but also what he thinks and how he feels. When the son tries to assert himself or question his mother's behavior, she completely, she gaslights him, guilt trips him, emotionally shuns him out until he gives in to her demands. And it's just a really sad story, and it's something that I think about all the time. I mean, it's not enough to reduce the interpretation of this manga and the character of the mother as the villain. Of course, she is a bad person in the story, when you relate it to the kind of mother she is to her son. But at the same time, when you peel back the layers of the story, you understand that so much of her narcissism stems from her own unresolved trauma and emotional wounds. So it's just that cycle of dysfunction that traps both her son and herself never really comes to an end. Definitely not an easy read, but at the same time, it's so eye opening. And if you want to understand mental illness and how it manifests, this is a great manga to do that. And speaking of stories that are about mental illness, I recently watched Lars von Trier's Antichrist for the first time. Oh man, that movie, it starts off as something else. It seems like it's something else, but towards the end of it, it becomes something else altogether. It's dark, sinister, twisted, psychotic, about mental illness, it's about the many different stages of grief, wanting to liberate oneself from that kind of a bond that you manifest with your loved ones in a way that you don't consciously realize. So it manifests subconsciously, it festers and rots inside. That's a film you should watch if you want to watch a film that deals with mental illness. Yeah, so anyway, back to Blood on the Tracks. The terror in Blood on the Tracks is heightened specifically because it is a manga. So it's not just a story that you read in words. The artwork is so haunting, and seeing that story visually feels devastating on an entirely different level. There is no escaping this manga once you started reading it. The panels force you to confront every little detail. So the look in the son's eyes, the smile on the mother's lips, the moments where, those silent, stagnant moments where nothing is explicitly happening, nothing is being said, those you feel even more intensely than anything else. When you're reading painful stories, when you're reading painful moments in a story, your imagination acts as a buffer when you're reading a novel. But in this manga, you see those terrifying moments come to life. Every ounce and drop of pain has been portrayed in such a striking and provocative manner. That's exactly why this manga feels so terrifying and unforgettable. The next favorite read of the year is The Apprenticeship or The Book of Pleasures by Clarice Lispector. Now, this is the only novel that is perhaps a romantic love story that is on this list. Probably the only romantic love story that I have read the entire year. And Lispector is probably the only author whose descriptions of love intertwined with self discovery and spirituality that I will read and fall for every time. She brings so much maturity and vulnerability to her writing. It's poetic, fragmented, existential, philosophical, achingly human. With a story like this, you have to let go of the traditional plot and structure. She transforms the ordinary into the transcendent. Yes, it's a love story, but at the same time, it's so much more than that. It's about how one can live with oneself and with others. Themes of loneliness, solitude, and confronting your own self are very prominent. Very similar to how Stoner felt, reading the Book of Pleasures felt like being very close to nature, because both stories explore the subtle and painful shades of love and self discovery. Lispector's portrayal of love is more expansive and philosophical, perhaps even a little more abstract. Stoner's portrayal of love is more grounded and quiet. John Williams just portrays the invisible struggles of a very ordinary life. I wouldn't say that the protagonist in Clarice Lispector's book is by any means ordinary, but at its core, both books ask the same question, which is how to find meaning in the quietest places of one's life, how to love and to be loved despite the inherent imperfections of our identities and the lives that we lead. She realized that to arrive at the simplicity she desired, she'd have to pass through all the complexities of her own being. The biggest problem with the human heart is its terror of feeling what it feels. This next book, I don't think I spoke about it or even wrote anything about this book when I read it at the time, and that's Samskara by U.R. Anantamurthy. It's one of those stories that I grew very fond of and started to understand a lot deeper as time passed, and I knew it would be on my favorites list. It takes place in a small South Indian village where caste and religion make up the identities of all its members. So the story follows the life of one of the most religious and devout member of the town, of the village, and he has to decide on the burial rites of this other member who went against everything that the villagers held sacred. And not only that, he lived a very impure and hedonistic life. So he drank, he ate meat, he married below his caste as the Brahmins. So as the story unfolds, it becomes very clear that this is just not a question about someone's funeral rites. It's about so much more. The writing is gritty and disturbing, and it just lingers for such a long time after you've put the book down. Nothing that is portrayed as ugly, polluted, or flawed in the story is insignificant. Every detail has so much weight. And just talking about it now just reminded me of a film that I watched this year that is also about a funeral. So, a son preparing the funeral for his father, and that is Emayu. I mean, just watch this movie. I went into this movie having zero idea what it's going to be about, and that in itself felt so gritty and dark and unsettling. Both the book Samskara and Emayu deal with so many things related to the cycle of life and death, the extremities of spirituality, the extremities of religion, and just the complete abandon of individuality that is so prevalent in our Indian culture. It's unnerving, harsh, and just portrayed in a very provocative manner. And about Samskara, everything that you read, everything is contributing to the uneasiness of the story, showing you the tension between what's sacred and what's profane. Also showing you the hollowness of what it means to lead a pure life in that sense. How weak and vulnerable human nature is, that even the purest person can't escape from that kind of harshness of life. If there is a book that hits you like an all encompassing sense of doom, it's Satan Tango. It's slow, it's hellish in a very dark and unsettling manner. And it takes its time to really get under your skin and pull you into a very desolate and dark world where nothing happens. And that fact feels disorienting as hell. Thinking about it now just reminded me of my experience of watching all the episodes of Decalogue. The atmosphere and pacing of Decalogue is very similar to that of Satan Tango, and of course, Bella does adaptation of the book, which is a 7-hour odyssey. But something about Decalogue in specific and the way that it offers little to no clarity in terms of traditional structure, traditional narrative, everything is sluggish and atmospheric, suffocating and oppressive, and that just mirrors Satan Tango so much. The sense of time is completely twisted and flattened. It drags out in a way that feels almost torturous, but in a deeply reflective and existential manner. Now, the novel is divided into long, winding chapters that twist and loop back on themselves. And just they're not only repeating events that take place in the character's life, but also mirroring the inner restlessness and desperation of the characters. When reading a book like this, you have to be very patient because you're moving at the same pace as the characters are. You're living through their moments of inaction and suffering. And that in itself, because it feels more like an experience than just a story, is very rewarding. The imagery too is something to think about. Nature is unsympathetic in this world. Everything is layered in grime and dust and decay. But this decay is not just physical, it's also moral as well as spiritual. The villagers are waiting for some kind of salvation that will never arrive. They are chained to their own disillusionment, and the weight of that they carry through to the rest of their miserable lives. It feels never ending and repetitive. The story just gives off a very nihilistic and almost hypnotic effect when you think back on it. It's humanity that feels at once real and surreal, familiar and alien. My video review for this next book, along with Mephisto's Klausman's Mephisto, is going to be up next week, where I dissect a lot more, and like just talk about some of the memorable aspects of this book. But the book that I'm talking about is Thomas Bernhard's The Loser. It very quickly just became one of my favorite reads of the year. It's so harrowing, it's so bitter and razor sharp. This is my first Bernhard read. The Loser is essentially a story about genius, just not in the way that you think. It doesn't portray terms like genius, ambition, success in a very positive light. It has a darker, more gritty exploration of these subjects. I saw whiplash right after I finished reading this book because that's exactly what the story feels like. Characters succumbing to envy, self destruction, and despair as a natural consequence of possessing any kind of creative talent or genius. Perfection, or achieving any kind of perfection, becomes a mirror in this story, where what's reflected back at the characters are only their inadequacies. So, what they cannot do or are too weak or fragile to do. And what's also great about the story is the way that it is narrated. So it reads like a monologue, so it's an unbroken stream of thought that just pulls you into the narrator's own obsessive thoughts and restless mind. The narrator is one of the main characters of the story. It's a novel that doesn't really let you look away from the messy and harsh reality of failure and mediocrity. And yet, somehow, at the end, you are left with a strange sense of catharsis in a very humorous way. So, it's a release of emotions that help you, the reader, measure up to your own limitations and insecurities. And honestly, you'd be naive to think you have none. The Loser, when seen through this lens, is so intense, it's so claustrophobic and devastatingly honest. Just such a great story, highly recommend. I'm not going to say much about these two books because I've already spoken at length about them, but I will say if you want to read a writer whose words hold up a mirror reflecting just the disquietude of existence in the most human and painfully way possible, read Kafka's short stories. His stories explore themes of alienation, suffering, despair, the search for meaning in a very existential and visceral way. When I think back on Kafka's stories, they just feel like fragments of a nightmare, very real details that have been taken from my own reality, my own subconscious mind, because he uses very human elements, if that makes sense, to heighten your sense of alienation from modern life, where your one's identity feels too fragmented against the backdrop of others. And his characters are very lonely. Kafka isolates them from the world. They are often unseen and unappreciated. So there is a very emotional sense of feeling out of place in the world. And concerning how much of that mirrors Kafka's own personal struggles, the isolation of his characters you feel on a very physical and emotional level. So the last book on this list is, finally I have a physical copy of it, is Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo. Another nightmarish and fragmented narrative that is so good. Each sentence pulls you deeper and deeper into what is so haunting and evocative in the story. I read this and Kafka's short stories almost at the same time, and they complemented each other perfectly. At its core, Pedro Paramo is about the past and how you cannot escape the grip of the past. You have characters that are trapped inside the history of Komala, so that's the town that the story is set in. The magical realism is subtle but profound. Everything is rooted in the shadows of memory and loss. The characters are ghosts, not in the conventional sense. You read them as echoes. A film like Uncle Boonmi, Who Can Recall His Past Life, has a similar thematic format as Pedro Paramo. It has ghosts, themes of death, memory, and the supernatural. And even the place where the story is set in, the shadowy jungles of Thailand, really amp up the intensity of the story, and that's exactly what this book does. By the end of it, when you finish reading a book like Pedro Paramo, it'll linger in your mind like a half-remembered dream. Devastating, grim, beautiful. Truly, it's one of the best books I've read ever. It's so intricately structured, it's so moving. Highly, highly recommend. All right. So this brings me to the end of this video. I had made so many notes on all these books, so I hope you resonated with some of them and that you read these books and watch these movies. I wasn't able to fit in all my favorite films of 2024 in the video. I just quickly mentioned them now. Akira Kurosawa's Dreams. Now, I'd like to have this movie on my TV all the time as just background. The visuals are just breathtakingly beautiful. The next one is Tampopo. Such a fun movie. Definitely a must if you're a foodie. Even if you're not, though, the way that food is a character in this movie is just amazing. An Indian movie, which is Manjumel Boys, so good that I watched this movie twice, almost instantaneously. One of the best films to come out of India. Nuri Bilselan's About Dry Grasses, very contemplative and atmospheric and even philosophical, I would say. And the last one is the funnest one for me, which is Y Tu Mama Tambien. Now, if you watch Gail Garcia Bernal's Criterion Closet video, his closet pics on the Criterion channel, that's all you need to watch before you decide to watch this movie. The way he gives his reasons to want to watch this movie is perfect. I can't beat that. All right. Thank you so much for watching this video. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week with my video review of Thomas Bernhard's The Loser, complementing Klaus Mann's Mephisto. So, yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys very soon.